always been a true believer that those results came clean, but it's a big blow. It's crushing. I never suspected anything.
Adelaide's #1 sports show.
Graham Corns and Stephen Rowe.
Weekday afternoons from 4
on 1395.
Adelaide's 5AA.
Interactive radio.
Tweet at 1395 5AA.
Peter Godfrey.
18 minutes past 5. Let's head across the ditch. New Zealand is where we're heading. Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz. Hi, Selwyn.
Yeah, g'day, Peter.
Hey, a question. The whole Lance Armstrong thing, has that been getting a lot of coverage over there?
Yes, it has. Yeah.
What's is there sort of a general sort of view that you've gleaned? People, disappointed, disheartened, or I don't know. What's?
I guess the feeling is that what was suspected earlier on is coming to pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been followed really closely. I think pretty much the same as you guys, really. Yeah, and the mood would be, and this whole industry around it,
yes,
where the individual is one part of it. I think that seems to be the conversations around the smoko table.
Yes, it's had plenty of conversations everywhere. Absolutely, the water cooler, the smoko table, the back fence. That's for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
On to now, my computer has just crashed, so I've got nothing here in front of me, but the asset sales that you've spoken about before that the national-led government there in New Zealand is pursuing, John Key's had to backtrack on what was about to happen.
This has been an embarrassing saga, really, Peter. Going right back to the campaign November last year, where the Nationals they were really pitching, this plan of partial asset sales for these state-owned assets, particularly in the energy and the mining areas. Now, throughout this year, there has been a building opposition to it. One, both a mobilisation of the political resistance to it, but also within the courts, where Maori in New Zealand are challenging the government, saying, well, in particular with this one, Mighty River Power, which is one of the most significant, I've got to say, that the water that Mighty River Power relies on to generate electricity is not actually in its own ownership. And it's saying that under the Treaty of Waitangi, going way back to 1860, 1840, is that water is in the ownership of Maori, and that the government has not calculated that into the values or the ongoing costs of Mighty River Power. Now, that's put it in very simple terms, but what is happening here is the government, when this challenge became quite serious, it went to the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a tribunal that gives an opinion on legal matters relating to Maori ownership and sovereignty and things like that. It gave an opinion saying, yes, it looks like there's a case here that could be heard. Now, the government got the jitters, said it's going to postpone these asset sales until next year. And then it changed its mind again only last week and says, no, we're going to go ahead with these sales, and it's going to start to roll out this year. Near the end, we'll start putting them up onto the share market, and Mighty River Power will be amongst those. And then on Monday this week, the High Court in New Zealand ruled that the government must not put them up for sale until this approach in the court by the Māori Council concludes. And so you had to get the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister trotting out again and saying, well, actually, we're going to go back on what we said last week, and we're going to postpone the sale of Mighty River Power until next year. And the Prime Minister then gives his expectation that the case will probably end up in the Supreme Court, but he expects the assets to be offered for partial sale between March and June 2013. And that's pretty much the trajectory, and since the election with this government, where it'll walk something out and say we're going to do this and then backs off. And it's the staccato rhythm of its decision-making and going back on its decisions and then going forward that just seems to be bleeding confidence all over the place.
Yeah. So I've seen that those opposed see this as a victory, the ruling. But I think John Key might have said something about, well, it's a victory if you see it's just been, the deferred down the track, or words to that effect. I think you might be able to correct me on that. So there's some very different views on what this means.
Yeah. Well, it's a success by those who are wanting to halt for sure. The government is determined to put these things up for sale, partially on the stock market. And the problem it has is that the calculations of the values of doing this was done prior to, midway through last year, really, when the commodity prices for coal were still hanging up there. Now those prices have collapsed. So solid energy being one of the main ticket items that the government is putting up for sale. Well, it's just not making the money that it was. So therefore, the government cannot expect to get the amount of money that it was expecting to last year as it went into the election. Likewise with, what it's like if you see anything that there are question marks around its value, like this Mighty River Power we've been talking about with the water ownership and ongoing legal challenges. If it does get floated on the share market and people are looking at that and nothing, last year I was kind of prepared to put maybe $100, maybe 500, maybe 1,000 on this, and you get some shares to that value. They'll be looking at all these question marks and be thinking, I don't know about that, and I might give you a tenner. And on top of that, you've got a government that is giving every indication it's a desperate seller. Now, if you're buying a car,
you see that desperate seller, there's a bargain there.
Yeah, if there's a desperate seller in the mix there, okay, I can barter this price down a bit. And I think that's the problem that the New Zealand government under the Nationals has got itself into. The values of these assets are going down. There isn't the confidence, for example, of ongoing stable governance that because of the changes there. The prices that they're getting back for whatever the trade they're in dropping off, or the ownership aspects of the resource they're using to generate their profit is in question. And so at the end of the day, those values that the government has been putting out there are clearly not going to be achieved. The problem is here for the New Zealand public is the New Zealand government has not recalculated to give an estimation of what it's doing. One would suspect that if it did so, it may be in a situation where people would really start to mobilise and say, mate, come on, is it really worth it?
Yeah.
And that question is the elusive question.
All right, a question that's not going to be answered in the short term, I guess. So when was that next hearing on this?
It's ongoing right through, so we're expecting it to come up in the next few weeks. Okay. So the Prime Minister is resolute that Crown Law, obviously representing the government's interests here, believes it would win in the courts. So the Prime Minister's position on it is articulated from that point of view.
Okay. On to the weather. We like to talk about the weather. Predicting the weather.
Yeah, predicting
pretty
the weather.
Tough. It's changing. We've the La Nina. Now I always get confused with these La Nina, El Nino. No.
Yeah, that's right. La Nina
already.
and El Nino. So my pronunciations are shocking. Anyone who can pronounce that should ring in and say, Peter, this is how it's said. But last year, we had the La Nina weather patterns in New Zealand, where a lot of the weather was coming down from the northeast of the Pacific, and the really wet weather on the western on the eastern side, I should say, and much drier on the west, which is uncharacteristic. What we've moved into here is this. We noticed, I've been picking up and speaking to you over the last few weeks, Peter, that the weather that you've talked about that you've got, we're getting in New Zealand around about 3 days later. And that's that more traditional northwest, southwest kind of flow of air that comes across the island nation over here in New Zealand. And so kind of saying, okay, well, if we want to predict the weather, maybe it's best to watch what's happening in South Australia and around there and to see what's happening. But what the New Zealand's National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, which is a bit of a mouthful, and we call it NIWA, now it's telling us that there are neutral conditions currently exist in the region, and the sea surface temperatures across the central and eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean are near normal, warmer than normal, but not reaching El Nino thresholds. Now, what it's saying is those fears mid-year where El Nino was coming in, where you get very, very, very extreme weather coming from, the western side, is not going to happen. But a little tip. If your listeners have got friends in New Zealand, hopefully they have, then they'll be able to ring up and say, or email and say, look, there's some bad weather coming. You people want to batten down the hatches. You've got 2 or 3 days to do it.
All right. Well, I can tell you, 18 with a shower or two today. So
Okay.
a few days, you probably get it. So there's nothing particularly serious coming.
Nothing.
So
Oh, that's
20 on Friday and Saturday, 23 Sunday. So
might be
by
a
midweek, you'll be into that.